Hello, everyone. Gary here from Timeline Astrology. This one's all about Prince Andrew and Bill Clinton. I have their charts here to take a look at because of the potential for their names to be included in a list that will be released in the coming days associated with the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. So, of course, they have been, associated with him for a long time, but they've never really been directly named. And so it'd be interesting to see if that is to happen. But I thought I'd take a look at it in both of their charts to see the potential. And having looked at their charts, I do think that Prince Andrew is more impacted than Bill Clinton. Whether Bill Clinton's name will be out there, I don't know. Whatever happens, I think Prince Andrew is more impacted by this. And I'm going to show you why I think that in terms of the astrology. So first of all, to give you Prince Andrew's chart, this is the South and North Indian style. I'm using sidereal signs, so they are more related to the actual star signs. He has Cancer rising. And more importantly than anything, I want to focus on one ascendant in this chart and in Bill Clinton's chart and no other. I don't want to get into all the nitty and gritty of these people's charts and their lives, but I do want to emphasize one point that is important for not just their chart, but any person's chart, and more especially celebrities or well-known individuals, people who are in the public eye, and that is the Arudha Lagna. This is an attained ascendant. Arudha is a Sanskrit word that means attainment. In this case, it means like an attained ascendant, like the results of who we are and what we do and what we put our energy into. And you simply calculate it from your ascendant. So it's like called a special ascendant in a way. So you count from your ascendant to the planet that rules your ascendant, and you count the same again, almost like a mirror image in your chart. And it shows how you come off, how people are looking at you, how they're perceiving you. So Cancer is his rising sign. You count to the moon, which rules Cancer, to Scorpio here, and that's 5 signs. And you count the same again from Scorpio, 5 signs, you end up in Pisces. So you'll see here AL in Pisces. So again, it's just how people are perceived, and you can calculate the same for your own chart. There's a couple of exceptions, but I won't go through those here. But essentially, it's how you are perceived. You might even be able to see that for yourself, or maybe look at you yourself through other people's eyes if you're objective enough. But most people really don't see themselves in that way. Other people are going to see them in that way. So, in other words, we see Andrew, Prince Andrew, as Pisces, but more especially as Ketu. Now, this is interesting because depending on what planet is in this ascendant and the planet that rules it, all of that will show how the person is perceived, whether it boosts their reputation, because it's a reputational thing essentially, or it negates their reputation. It reduces their reputation. Now, Ketu, as you might know, in Vedic astrology, is said to reduce things, even remove things completely. Even though it might be strong in Pisces in a more spiritual way, this is not a spiritual person, so we have to keep it in context that this is a person who doesn't seem to at least live a spiritual life. I don't know. But in terms of his public persona, this is not a good position. The nodes in any way, Rahu or Ketu, are going to in some way overshadow him because they are literally the shadows, the eclipses. So Ketu, the south node of the moon, an eclipse in Pisces, where he is seen in a way in the public eye, is not so great for him. What's also not so great for him and the timing of this, and you'll see this with Bill Clinton as well, is that this is active in his chart because otherwise we're just going to be talking about this in a general sort of way that Prince Andrew has never had a good reputation in the public eye because of this. But the reason why it's more impactful now is because has been activated in the Dasha sequence, in the cycles of Vedic astrology. And these are more especially calculated from the moon. You can see the moon there in Scorpio, so that would have kicked off the cycles, and more especially in relation to the lunar mansion this is placed in. And in the sequence, it's currently Venus major cycle that is coming to an end next year, and it's a 20-year long Venus cycle. And how it comes to an end is it comes to the last part, the sub period of Ketu itself. So, in other words, Prince Andrew is currently experiencing a Venus Ketu cycle. Venus is coming to an end, and it brings it to an end by the last subcycle of the previous major cycle, which is Ketu. So, in other words, he had Ketu over 20 years ago for those previous 7 years, and then he had Venus for 20 years, and now he's coming to the end of his Venus in this Ketu year. It's only 1 year of a sub period of Ketu. In other words, it brings up all of that from the past again, all of that scandal, all of those hidden things. That's what Ketu is. It dredges all of that up, and all of his past mistakes are brought to light. Not only that, so it's Venus Ketu into next year, next summer, where he enters the sun, but the sun itself is not offering any relief in that sense in terms of scandal, because the sun in his chart is in the eighth house of scandal and in the 12th house from his Arudha Lagna in Aquarius. The 12th house is all about loss. And what are we talking about in terms of the 12th from his Arudha, remember, is his loss of reputation. So this scandal is obviously going to bring a further loss of reputation, simply. I mean, that's quite easy to predict, I think. On top of all of that, there are transits that are going to trigger this, and in the coming weeks, especially, and actually from now, really. And the reason I'm going to say that is that the eclipse, even though it doesn't happen until April 8th in Pisces, sidereal Pisces, at 25 degrees of Pisces, it's already been impacted because the nodes have moved in here. So Rahu, the north node, has just moved into Pisces and is almost at that 25-degree mark. So it's activating it already, and in the coming weeks, it will more so. So it's bringing it to light. This Rahu transit is bringing this to light. That eclipse being triggered by Rahu from the beginning of the year is why we're seeing this come out now in the next few weeks. So it doesn't look good for him, for sure, because now we're talking about not just Ketu in his chart being activated, we're talking about the transit of the opposite, Rahu, which might bring you more to light, might bring you more in terms of reputational sort of stance, bring you more to prominence, let's say, but not for the best reasons always. So if the Arudha Lagna in your chart, for example, has been transited by Rahu, yeah, you might become more well known, you might become famous even, or at least people might see you more in your circles, but it might not be for the best reason, or there might be some price to pay for that. That's what Rahu always brings. It's like it increases something, but then there's also something to pay, some price to pay. It's a shadow also, remember. So he's getting hit by both shadows in a sense, in terms of his reputation, at least. So that's Prince Andrew. Let's have a look at Bill Clinton. I don't think Bill Clinton is as impacted, but he is being impacted. And interestingly enough, again, by Ketu. So I'll show you this. Even though he was born when Rahu was in Taurus, where his Aruda is. So if we use the sidereal signs again, Virgo is his rising sign. The ruler of this is Mercury. You count to Mercury, the 11th whole sign, and you count 11 from there. Again, you end up in Taurus. So this is how we perceive Bill Clinton. We perceive him as Taurus, and Rahu and Uranus are having a big impact on how we see him. And essentially what that means is, and it's borne out, it's basically that we see him as a lovable rogue, essentially. That's Taurus and Rahu. Rahu is, by Parashara's estimations, exalted in Taurus. So yeah, you might say that it can bring out its better qualities, and I think it does, but it's still Rahu, it's still a shadow, and it's going to bring up those kind of issues as well. So let's face it, Bill Clinton was impeached for the sexual scandal the affair he had with Monica Lewinsky. And by the way, that all happened, that whole period happened, um, well, the impeachment begun at least in a Ketu subcycle way back when, 1998. But anyway, that aside, the point of that now is that he's currently in a Ketu cycle. So his current cycle, now this is a bit more complex, so bear with me. His moon is in Aquarius, the sixth whole sign. So you can actually use two different calculations for his Vimshottari Dasha. You can do the regular one, counting from the moon here, beginning with Shatabishaj and Rahu from the beginning of his life. He would therefore be in Venus now, just like Prince Andrew. And that is in itself important because, again, Venus is Venus, right? But Venus now, it's Venus Mercury, according to this placement of the moon. That means next year, or actually a couple of years' time, because it's Venus Mercury, and then by 2026, it will be Venus Ketu until 2027, where he enters the sun cycle. So that's kind of dredging it up for him as well in a couple of years. However, there's another way of reading this as well. Because of the moon in the sixth house, you can calculate it a different way. You can count 4 places from this lunar mansion and count it from Mercury to begin with in Bravati. And then actually he'd be in currently a Jupiter cycle, not Venus. And the sub-cycle is Ketu, according to that calculation. So even if you don't do that calculation and say Ketu is very active now in his chart. On the third level, Venus, Mercury, and the third level is Ketu. Just calculating regular Vimshottri, it's Venus, Mercury, Ketu. And that lasts until February this year, February 2024. So whatever way you spin it, in other words, Ketu is impacting him. The only thing I would say about that, even though Ketu, like I said, brings up the past, and in coming years, actually, that might be more of an issue, I would say, with Ketu kicking in more strongly in 2026, and again, bringing up the past of many years ago, over 20 years ago. And that means, because 20 years ago was the Monica Lewinsky scandal. So it's going to bring all of that up again in a couple of years, whatever way you spin it. But in the current time frame, the transits are kind of supporting him in a way. And again, this Ketu cycle is a lesser one for him. It's shorter. It ends in February in the regular way of reading it. And the transits are supporting him because Jupiter is about to move into Taurus in May this year. And Jupiter, unlike Rahu, promotes the reputation. It generally supports and protects one's reputation. Now, sometimes, of course, you could say that, okay, that could increase somebody's reputation and that would increase something like Rahu in a more negative way. It's kind of like anytime Rahu and Jupiter get together, there's always a flip side of it. There's always something sullied. There's always something else coming out. So it could indeed be that we are just more aware of him again, like we haven't been in recent times, and he's promoted in some way again, but maybe again for the wrong reasons. Maybe again for these Rahu type reasons, this kind of scandals, essentially. It was a scandal more than anything. That's what we'll always remember him for, whatever else he did in the US politics. We'll always remember him for that affair with Monica Lewinsky. So it's all coming out again. And for both of these people, and in the coming weeks, literally, these are likely being named in these papers in relation to this case. So we shall see. I just thought I'd highlight that in terms of this Arudha Lagna. You can do it for yourself. You can calculate it very easily. You just count from your rising sign to the planet that rules your rising sign, if you know it, and you count the same again. And apart from a couple of exceptions that I won't go into here, that's a general way of doing it. And just see, can you see yourself in that way? Can you see yourself through other people's eyes? So I hope that was helpful. If you found that helpful, please let me know below. If you have any questions about that, please post below. I'd love to hear your questions or any thoughts you have on that. And we shall see as this comes out in the next few weeks, of course, how all of this is going to pan out. Okay, until next time.